welcome. As you guys are joining us today, we encourage you to use the chat box at the bottom of your screen to tell us where you're joining from, whether that's a city or a country. It'd be great for all of us to know who's joining us today. Some of you who've been, this is possibly your third session of the day already, so thank you for dedicating your day to these amazing conversations around collaboration and circularity. So feel free, don't be shy. Let us know where you're coming from today, in the city or the country, in the chat function. Oh, we got a shy bunch. Okay, we got New York City, or just outside of New York City, Ottawa, Toronto, good old snowy Toronto, Montreal, Toronto, Manila, England. Welcome. If you're just joining us, please tell us where you're coming from in the chat function. So city or country. Patricia, yes, your third session today from Montreal. That's great. Utrecht, welcome. Nashville. Okay, we're just going to give it a couple more minutes for everybody to join us. So please feel free to let us know where you're joining from in the chat function. Sherwood Park. Don't know where that is. Okay, just gonna give it another couple minutes. Hi, Michael, from Toronto. If you're just joining us, feel free to let us know where you're calling in from, what city or what country in the chat function. We're just gonna give it another minute for everybody to get in here. Oakland. Brooklyn, India. Vancouver, the Netherlands, welcome. Still people filing in here. Welcome. If you're just joining us, feel free to tell us where you're joining from in the chat function. Bangladesh. Okay. California. All right, I still see the numbers are going up, so people are still filing in here, but just to be mindful of the time, especially because the last couple of sessions we ran out of time for all of the amazing questions that we're getting from our audience today. So I'm going to begin by first stating that the land I'm standing on today in Toronto is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We are so grateful for this month's sponsors, H&M, PwC, and Bank & Vogue, as without their support, we would not be able to offer you these webinars for free. For those of you I don't know, I'm Kelly Drennan. I'm the founding executive director of Fashion Takes Action, which is a nonprofit based in Canada that I started in 2007, devoted to the advancement of sustainability and circularity in fashion. Our physical wear conference event that first began in 2014 is now a digital webinar series, which we're thrilled about because now it allows for evidently a much more global audience. But what you might not know about Fashion Takes Action is that we also do work with consumers, primarily through a youth education program that to date has been delivered to over 20,000 students in their classrooms. And these are students that are aged 8 to 17 years old. We do believe that getting them before their consumers actually has a longer term impact on behavior change. So we're asking that, in lieu of the fact that these are free webinars, or possibly in lieu of the fact that, holiday gift giving, corporate gift giving is a little bit tricky given the pandemic this year, that you either as an individual or as an organization consider donating to our current crowdfunder campaign, which is to raise money to digitize our school program so that we can actually reach more students throughout the pandemic, but also beyond the Canadian borders. And our goal is to really deliver this to 100,000 students in the next year. So the link is actually going to be shared in the chat function there. And also, speaking of the chat function, please try and just limit that chat to comments, links that are being shared. If you have questions for our speakers today, please use the Q&A function that's located at the bottom of the screen. Also, we have the upvote function on so that you can like somebody else's question. It'll get bumped up to the top. So we know from previous sessions today that there's a very curious community out there. So there's lots of questions, and it would just be, really helpful for me, who is moderating the discussion, to see where the most popular questions are. The recording today, this is being recorded today. We will be sharing a link, so feel free if you had any colleagues that weren't able to show up, or if you have to leave early, we will be sharing this, of course, with you. As I mentioned, we've had 2 incredible sessions so far today that demonstrate how partnerships can lead to scale. We will be sharing those recordings, but this next session really excites me because, unlike the last 2 that focused on partnerships between 2 companies, this panel will address the power of collective impact and cross-sector collaboration to accelerate circularity. And it's an approach that I'm very familiar with, having recently convened the Ontario Textile Diversion Collaborative of over 40 stakeholders from multiple sectors, municipalities, policymakers, NGOs, charities, collectors, academics, and retailers, in an effort to increase textile waste diversion. And the magic of having multiple stakeholders come together to solve a problem is that it makes it possible to use our differences as an asset. So our differences in resources, experience, demographics, industry, and sector, as well as differences in perspective, such as, how do we assess risks, or time and scale. And, cross-sector leaders recognize that the most robust and sustainable solutions will come from designing with and not just for the communities most affected. As a result, effective cross-sector leaders understand the human-centered design approach and engage key stakeholders with empathy, embracing an iterative process. But they go one step further. They have the capacity to map the system and commit to having those most affected at the table as co-designers, addressing critical power dynamics so that all the stakeholders are engaged and buy into a co-designed solution. So the end result, of course, is a solution that can solve complex societal challenges and that creates shared value for all. Earlier this year, Fashion Positive, now operating out of the Textile Exchange, published the Circular Materials Guidelines, the first ever publicly available guidelines that defines circular materials. These guidelines are for producers of fibers, both commercially available and innovative, and clarifies the pathway to what we call circular, meaning that the fibers come from safer, recycled, and renewable sources. The intention of the Circular Materials Guidelines is to clarify for brands, retailers, producers, NGOs, standards and certifications bodies, and industry, how the individual standards fit into the vision of circular materials. And before Fashion Positive, these connections weren't really that clear. So this session is an excellent example of cross-sectoral collaboration, and I'm so pleased to introduce our next guests who were instrumental in taking action towards circularity with this project. We have Marilyn Martinez, who is the Senior Analyst at Ellen MacArthur Foundation's Make Fashion Circular, Megan Stoneburner, the Director of Sustainability and Sourcing at Outerknown, and of course, Sasha Radovich, Executive Director of Fashion Positive. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Kelly.
So why don't we get started maybe with you, Sasha, and you can walk us through the circular materials guidelines before we then get into some specifics about your work as a collaborative.
Great. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me and for all of us, really. I mean, our three organizations have all worked together over the last, well, several years, I suppose, but I really am pleased to be here with you and Fashion Takes Action, as well as in the WEAR conference. So I really appreciate having the opportunity to speak a little bit about our work and what we're doing going forward. So it's a really great opportunity. Appreciate it. So I will start by just giving a little bit of a background on Fashion Positive. Fashion Positive has been around since 2014, and we started out in the Cradle to Cradle Innovation Institute, and we transitioned this year to Textile Exchange. And there's a lot of really good reasons why that happened, but one of the main ones is that we wanted to share a mission with within the supply chain where we're focused, which is fibers. And our mission is to drive the vision, definition, and implementation of safe and circular materials for the fashion industry. And that meant really expanding the way that we do our work to drive industry level collaboration so that we can start to get to a point of scalability within the circular economy, which is going to be a daunting task that has to happen if we're going to address some of the big impacts that we're having as an industry. And to your point, Kelly, it's going to take deep collaboration in order to change a whole system and to understand the system and what parts of the system we need to start to adjust and how we can do that together. As probably many people know on this webinar, the fashion industry has immense impacts on this planet as well as to people, and both the interrelationship between environment and people. So as we know, there's 13 million tons of textile waste dumped each year. That's a dump truck a second within the United States. And 95% of this could be reused or repurposed. Most of it just goes into landfill. This also means that it's emitting a lot of pollution and toxicity into the environment. And that's just post-waste. So we haven't even really truly accounted for the fact that the production and manufacturing cycle also has an immense amount of impact on people and the planet. And if we start to account for not only addressing the manufacturing impacts, but also the value that we could be getting out of our materials post-consumer, we could be saving up to $500 billion in value. So we're just throwing things away that are highly valuable that we could start to really think about reusing and putting back into a system that keeps us all safer and the planet cleaner. I think most of us have realized that our supply chain in the fashion industry is very vulnerable and there's not a lot of resilience. I think COVID-19 has provided a really big opportunity for a wake-up call. I think because climate change and these impacts are so, in the human existence, slow moving, it's very hard to get policy changes. It's very hard to get systems changes unless there's a really big impact. And this impact on COVID-19 has really opened people's eyes to not only the fashion industry, but also the food supply chain. A lot of different supply chains are not resilient to these kinds of impacts and these kinds of shocks to the global system. And so we really have to think differently about what we have locally, what do we have globally, and how do we keep our resources more in use in order to have a more resilient planet and economy. One of the things that we're finding in the fashion industry is people are starting to think about the reuse of materials. How do we create new materials, new purpose for different materials, have longevity or have more opportunities to get cycled back into the system. So there's a lot of material science going on right now. There's an immense amount of innovation. There's investment by brands and also other investment firms on new materials because of the potential of new fabrics. But one of the issues is that they're not a lot of the material scientists are starting to take into account what it means to bring about safe material production and safe materials for the end of life. So you have a lot of innovation taking place in the material life cycle, let's say, but it's not being accounted for the circular system. And so if there's a lot of material science taking place and it hasn't really caught up to ensuring the safety of circular materials, we're still going to be in the same problem we are in now in terms of the planetary and societal impact. So one of the things that we're really focused on is ensuring that not only current but future innovative materials are taking into account the whole life cycle of material development. And within Fashion Positive, what we started to notice when we were putting together kind of guidance and helping the industry understand how to use certifications and standards bodies and innovative materials that maybe haven't been certified yet, there was no real way of deciphering how to leverage these certification bodies. And if a company had already invested in one, they weren't willing to invest in a different way. And so how do we allow the industry to move towards a cleaner, safer system was incredibly difficult. So the first thing that we knew was that we needed to develop these guidelines and to help through the process, continually improve the guidance for the industry to move towards a circular system. Knowing that right now, not all the systems are in place and not all the materials are perfect. So how do we actually guide the industry towards a better solution? Secondly, that we were having a lot of issues on the lack of collaboration. So we may have collaborations between brands, or we may have collaborations with an innovator and a brand for a proprietary material, but there's not a lot of collaboration through the system, particularly on the back end when you start getting from post-consumer back into the cycle. That part of our supply chain is completely independent right now. So there's a lack of collaboration vertically between all of these actors. And finally, what we've realized is the complexity of this issue and the amount of investment it's going to take. This will require unprecedented levels of collaboration and money in order to retool our supply chain, to understand the investment needs to bring the cycle together, and what kinds of investment, human capital investment, is needed, even just in terms of policy making and other areas where investments are needed. So Fashion Positive has three goals in order to address these challenges. One is to define and educate the industry on what circular materials are, enable the development of high volume, safe and circular materials. So that means moving away from proprietary, unscalable materials, which are also very important to innovation and to new product development. But what we're looking for really is industry level scale towards circular materials. And so we're very focused on that aim. And then third, to accelerate the use by brands of innovative circular materials. So as Kelly had mentioned, we launched the Circular Material Guidelines in September. They were published in August, but we launched them in September. And what the aim is, and I think you're getting a gist of it, is to really help the industry understand certifications, especially if people have already started to invest in something, and to see how that certification or even that activity moves towards circular economy. We're also helping those that are developing innovative materials to start accounting for the whole manufacturing process. And then we've committed to updating these guidelines pretty regularly, probably annually, because the industry is changing so quickly and there's so many innovative materials coming out, as well as the retooling of the supply chain, that we will be updating the guidelines in order to help drive more and more circularity and safe material development. So there's 5 areas to the guidelines, and I'm just going to go to the next slide because it may be easier than just talking through it here. The first thing is that we started the 5 areas through 3 principles. First of all, that we wanted the guidelines to keep in mind that whatever fibers and materials are being developed, that the waste and pollution is designed out from the beginning of this cycle of feedstock into fiber development. Secondly, that the fibers should have in its in its development the idea that products and materials are kept in maximum use. So durability is an important part of this framework. However, as we know in the industry, there's always going to be trade-offs. And so part of what the guidelines tries to understand is, how does a company start to move towards safer, cleaner materials while making their own decisions around durability, for instance, or other trade-offs that the companies are trying to make in their product design. But with the idea that really we're looking for maximum use. Gone are the days of just fast fashion. And finally, that we know that there's going to be continuous improvement. There will always have to be a move towards better. Right now, we don't even have all the systems in place, so there will be continuous improvement. The 5 areas of the guidelines go from feedstock or material reutilization. So designing materials that come from safe fibers that are coming in from nature. We are now, and we haven't launched this work yet. When we first started Fashion Positive's work on the guidelines, there was a decision that we would be taking a very clean stand around the fact that we should be working with natural materials, whether cellulosic or protein, and that we should be designing out fossil fuel synthetics. We realize that fossil fuel synthetics is the largest growing fiber. And we will be starting to think about how do we understand what circularity means for that fiber. But these guidelines focus on natural fibers and how we get the feedstock into the supply chain. Secondly, material health, so the chemistry. Third, water stewardship. So how water is not only managed, but cleaned on the back end. Renewable energy. And then the 5th is around social fairness. We haven't developed this part of the guideline yet. It's going to be launched and delivered next year. One of the things that we're really struggling with within the social fairness and working with all the stakeholders is really identifying what are the material issues for the part of the supply chain that we're dealing with now. And that's going to take a lot of collaboration to understand really what impacts we're trying to solve for at the innovators level in fiber development. And what should we be expecting, and what should we be expecting in terms of some kind of certification or framework or reporting? We're not sure yet what it is, but this is an area that was kept sort of separate from the environmental areas so that we could really give guidance on what was happening in the industry currently with environmental impacts, and then focus on the social fairness aspect this next year, 2021. This slide I kept in just so you can have a little bit more detail about what the areas are in each of the pillars. However, really what I want to say about this is that you can see the certification and other organizations that fed into what was going to go into the guidance in terms of certification bodies. We also had a lot of NGOs, and really the brands also helped shape this, and we had input from innovative fiber developers. But we had a lot of these standards and certification bodies feeding into what they would see as a guideline in order to help usher in this next phase of the industry. As I mentioned, we also have a group of very core brands that have been working on this guideline and thankfully lending us their technical staff in order to really think through fiber development and how product is used and made. So we have a dedicated set of brands, and of course one of them is on this webinar with us today. And again, just so that you could see it, all of the different certification bodies that were able to feed into this work and who are going to continue to feed into this work as things develop. We also, of course, have been working with other organizations, and this is just a few. We're obviously in a large circular economy ecosystem of circular organizations, so a lot of us work and talk together around our work. But as Kelly had mentioned, we're part of Textile Exchange. We are now a project of Textile Exchange, and we're also working on how to usher in the industry more ready-made tools in order for brands to be able to pick up and utilize the guidelines and other preferred materials more easily. So we're working with Textile Exchange on that. Of course, we work with EMF and Make Fashion Circular on the guidance and a lot of issues around circularity, and we have a close collaboration with these guidelines and moving forward together as well on other collaborative work. And then SAC, we're also pursuing different tools and mechanisms that circularity can come into the industry, either through the MSI in order to track the impacts better, and also LCA data. So we're collaborating up, down, and across. There's two other areas that we're working on in close collaboration. One, we are forming a partnership with Untitled Capital in order to really explore ideas around how financing and innovative financing can really usher in the acceleration part of our goals, as well as AII, the Apparel Impact Institute, that we are working with in order to address more of the supply chain issues and the gaps in risk that we're finding between the innovators, the producers, and the brands. So we are forming 2 other partnerships as we speak with some of our core partners to really usher in more of our goals. And then, of course, we have our amazing advisory council, which spans also the circular industry and has been providing us guidance and input particularly since our transition into Textile Exchange. So thank you so much, Kelly, for allowing me to talk a little bit about what we're doing.
Yes, my pleasure. And yeah. I guess there's been someone hammering your...
No,
you did a really great job of not letting that really affect you. So
well, I hope everybody can hear. I'm so sorry.
It did not affect the ability to hear you at all. So it's just a couple of people were like, "Do you hear hammering?" This is COVID. So,
there's construction going on, and I can't do anything about it.
That's okay. So yeah, thank you so much for taking us through those guidelines. And I just have some questions for you. We'll chat for a little bit, and then to the audience, if you have questions as well, please enter them in the Q&A. And again, I encourage you to like questions that somebody else posed, which will bump them up in the order. So I guess my first question to you all, and maybe we can start with you, Marilyn, is why do you personally feel it is important to collaborate in order to accelerate circularity in fashion? I mean, we know EMF is certainly a very collaborative organization. This isn't the first project that you've collaborated on, so would love to get your perspective on
that. Thanks, Kelly, and thanks everyone for having me here today. So I think, well, first of all, I guess I will give a quick context on what EMF does, just in case not everyone is familiar, but we are a non-for-profit organization with a sole mission of accelerating the circular economy globally. And within that, I am part of Make Fashion Circular, which in a sense focuses on a single industry and accelerating the transition towards a circular economy in fashion for me. We've got different teams that looking at different industries. So, I mean, why is collaboration important is, in a sense, is because the circular economy is a bigger idea. It is about designing solutions for people. And for that, there's no single actor in the industry which can do it alone. So I think that we need, like collaboration from throughout the value chain. And based on that, that's how we set up the Make Fashion Circular initiative, in a sense, by having representatives from the entire value chain, so from like fiber manufacturers, the actual manufacturers, brands, recyclers, collectors, and also like wider stakeholders in the periphery. So we also have links with financial institutions and innovator hubs such as Fashion for Good, for example, and Textile Exchange, and Cradle to Cradle. So I think we really try to cover it all. And I mean, just to add on the collaboration point, it is key, but in order for it to be effective, what needs to happen is that everyone needs to have a common goal or work towards a common vision. So as long as that vision is understood by people, then collaboration can be effective so that people know where they're going and what they have to work on. So we actually, on that note, we released the vision for a circular economy in fashion. And you can find it, it's online, publicly available. And in a sense, this goal that we set up for the industry is that products should be used more, made to be made again, and made from safe, renewable, or recycled materials.
Great, thank you so much. And how about you, Meg? You know, tell us maybe a little bit about Outerknown's position and what the motivation was to get involved in the guidelines.
Yeah, of course. So for those who aren't familiar with Outerknown, so it's a small apparel brand, sustainable apparel brand founded by Kelly Slater. So yes, the professional surfer, who's obviously his career path has been in the water and nature. So a core goal of his, or a core value of his, is to preserve the planet. So with that, we're very fortunate in the sense that he built this brand model to actually prove the business viability of a sustainable brand, to show that it actually is achievable through collective action. So from the get-go, the vision of the brand was to create systematic change, and knowing that we can't do that alone, that we have to partner with industry stakeholders, industry peers, the supply chain, etc., to be able to help shepherd this work forward. And I think that the guidelines were imperative for us in terms of actually approaching our goal and building this goal of becoming fully circular by 2030. And the sense that if you look at circularity, the concept has been around for years, but we don't have a set of shared standards, definitions, or an approach to help us all kind of rally behind this concept to actually drive impact, to drive convergence. So I feel like Fashion Positive is really at the intersection of driving this progress in terms of achieving circularity, because we're all coming together to have these conversations to say, what exactly are we trying to achieve? How are we going to be able to do it? What are the roadblocks and the opportunities? And how do we put that on paper to actually work together? So for us, I mean, in terms of achieving our goals, it's imperative, but beyond that, it's imperative for this industry to make any sort of significant changes.
Great, thank you so much. And Sasha, a question for you, just in terms of the selection process. How did you go about choosing the various partners, and there's many, to work with on these guidelines?
Well, I think one of the things is that I should say is that one of the founders of Fashion Positive, Annie Gullensrud, was really the impetus behind pulling together the first level and first wave of engagement. So from the beginning, Fashion Positive has been an engaged group of brands, and because it came out of Cradle to Cradle, August, a certification body. So over time, because really there was an imperative to get this, what Meg was just talking about, this clarity and alignment, you can't do that without bringing people to the table. So first of all of the certification and standards bodies that were working on the space of improving the supply chain environmentally and socially were paramount to bring into the room and say, okay, you're all doing slightly separate things, doing things that are really impactful. How do we understand a good vision together and not necessarily compete on a vision? And what Marilyn said of like how we're all trying to achieve a single goal. The brands were paramount in terms of having big brands and small brands. And I think the thinking was that the small brands are much more nimble and able to make decisions and test things out quicker. The big brands had more scalable impact and could think differently around whole changes in how they were functioning operationally. So you could learn different things from different brands. So I think also we needed technical people. So there were also a couple of technical people that were brought in order to really give guidance.
And would you say that there were any, looking back, like any stakeholders maybe that you wish that were missing, that you wish you had included, and yeah, why or why not?
Yeah, so I took over Fashion Positive at the beginning of this year, and one of the things that was glaring to me is that there weren't active suppliers and producers in the group, which is a big point in the supply chain that needs to be not only brought along, but really have an active voice in what's going to work, what's not going to work. So we've been starting to design out a process and starting to bring in more suppliers in order to really have those conversations. And I know that also EMF, as well as Fashion for Good and others, are really working more and more with the suppliers at this point, because it is such an important part of the chain. And that is often, unfortunately, a missing part of the conversation, which is critical. It's a critical part of the supply chain.
And another, I guess, role that seems quite important as well, and maybe Marilyn, you can address this one, is the role of government and policy, and what role could, what role is available there in terms of progressing or advancing this work?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I think that from where we stand, at least from EMF, given our periphery, we're not inside the industry. So that's actually why we set up these collaborative efforts, because when we are detailing the vision, it's better if we detail a vision with the people and for the people. So that's how we test everything with them. When it comes to government, they are definitely, a key stakeholder group. And we do have a team that specifically looks at enabling policies and how can we better inform policy, because we don't work with lobby organizations. So our angle is a bit different. It's like, how can we best create this content and make it informative for them so that they can make decisions that can progress the conversation and the discussion on circular economy globally. So with that in mind, then what we do is we look at we talk to the industry all the time. So we're fully aware of what are the key challenges, where is innovation most needed. And with that, we can have really interesting information that governments want to know, because they want to know, where should they channel investment, where are the main roadblocks, like if what regulation is in place. So for example, there's a lot of talk about EPR schemes that can enable circular business models. So all of that comes out of these conversations that we have with the industry. So we almost act as like the connector between the industry and the policy sometimes, or like the enabling mechanism, but we don't work with them directly. So we have a different way of working.
Great, thanks. Do either of you have anything to add? No? Okay. So one of the things that's important to any collaboration is trust. And with so many stakeholders, surely there were competitors as well as part of this collaboration, particularly on the brand side. So, just wondering, how competitors felt really working on the project. Was it even an issue? And maybe Megan, you can provide your perspective from brand's perspective on that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think this is definitely a pre-competitive space in the sense that we've almost like built a family. We share a lot of ideas outside of just like circular design and circular fibers with this membership group, because we realize that once again, like this work is so important that there isn't one single brand that's going to benefit from this. Even if we're all trying to achieve first to market, it's not to say that you're going to see a huge spike in sales. And is that even the like direct result that you're hoping for, right? So the goal here is to produce end results that benefit industry and all of the different brands' needs. For example, with polyester and trying to find a solution for polyester, trying to find a durable recycled cotton, that's something that benefits all. Those are fibers that exist for everyone. And the competitive kind of factor comes in through design and through problem solving through other design elements, not necessarily the fibers themselves. So it's been really great to work so closely with Mara Hoffman, with Athleta, M&S, the entire group, Eileen Fisher, because everyone truly is kind of holding hands per se to achieve this end goal.
That's great, thank you. There's a few questions I'd like to now turn to. They're all very kind of similar from the audience. So is there any collaborative work being done around marketing circular products? So to try and increase consumer demand. Similarly, what is the goal to educate consumers that they can be a part of the solution towards the circular economy? I can answer that. And then also the press and media and advertising agencies, are also considered stakeholders as part of the solution to the circular fashion economy. And so maybe you could each speak to that piece about how your organization is working to really amplify this message to consumers. Yeah, who wants to start with that?
I can start first, I guess, because I'm not from the industry, and then maybe Megan can follow from kind of like an industry perspective. But from a circular economy point of view, which is like the expertise that I sit on, I guess like the more when you design whatever you're designing, the customer value proposition needs to be there so that you effectively capture them and incentivize them to use that channel. So for example, when designing, from like product design, when designing a product, there needs to be attractive for someone, right? Otherwise people wouldn't go to it. So same with like circular business models, which extend clothing use, such as resale, rental, repairs. The easiest, the most convenient, hassle-free, effortless that you make it for the customer, then it's a no-brainer for them to jump into that opportunity. So it's, I guess flip it around the angle and not thinking about how can we educate, but rather how can we design solutions so that customers really prefer that above anything else, because it just makes more sense. And obviously it's not just because and then it becomes a no-brainer because it's more convenient to you, it's better for the environment, and the company that you're, or the platform or whatever you're using, is also profiting for it. So I think once we get there, it should be, a straightforward, I guess, solution and option from the customer point of view.
Great. Yeah, Megan, yeah.
I was going to say, I completely agree with that. I think we need to make it efficient and accessible. And I think that brands, if there's like one takeaway for brands on this webinar, is to think about the responsibility in terms of education. Like, as we build these new structures, as we build these new goals, we have to help educate the customer, because when we're talking about circularity, we're talking about shifts in behaviors, and pretty significant shifts in behaviors in terms of their relationship with the product, what they do with it at its end of life, how we define end of life, instead of tossing it to landfill, recognizing that this garment has significant value and should be passed along until it's worn or torn through. So how do we help to actually share that through storytelling that's meaningful and engage customers in a way where they want to partake? Because once again, it is efficient and accessibility in terms of the programs that we launch, but also because we see with COVID, the increase in sustainable denim, the increase of thrifting or secondhand product has skyrocketed. People want to actually be a part of collective action. Individuals want to actually partake in a meaningful way. So how do we provide that opportunity and continue to educate and inspire others to do so? So, a few things that we're doing at Outer Known, we have our C jeans where you can send them back in if they wear a tear after more than a few years. We'll still take them back and repair them for them. Beyond that, we're partnering with Eon and their Circularity technology to be able to trace garments and to better storytell through really exciting platforms and through a QR code. And with that, looking at resale models to be able to educate the customer in terms of all of the various platforms to be able to keep these products in circulation.
Wow, that's incredible. And I love Eon. We actually our January Wear series is also going to be focused on circularity, but with a focus on transparency and innovation. So we're excited to have that featured. So I didn't realize that you were working with them. That's really fantastic. And then also just in terms of, our work at Fashion Takes Action, as I mentioned before, we not only work with industry, but we work with consumers. And so I think there is a role that NGOs and NPOs play, certainly in helping brands and the industry at large to really communicate and amplify all of these success stories and empower consumers with the tools and solutions to actually become more conscious, and something that we've created called the 7 R's of fashion, we use frequently, which is, reduce, reuse, recycle, everybody knows, but then also, as mentioned in several times throughout this conversation, resale, repair, repurpose, and rental as well. So, so happy to chat with anybody after this webinar about how we can work with you or how you could support our education program, because the young people are future consumers and future fashion and climate leaders. So, so thank you for that question.
And a point of that you just said is quite important, I think, to highlight, which is like I guess the role the brands and retailers can play in customer empowerment. So it's about, sharing that knowledge and know-how and increasing transparency and giving that enough information to the customers so that they can make their own decisions in like the most informed way. I think, like that, I think that angle could work quite nice.
Thank you. Okay, question here. How do you see the difference in opportunity of the new innovative textiles, fiber recycled textiles, so like fruits, recycled plastics, organic cotton? So I know, Sasha and I was going to ask you to talk a little bit more about what was out of scope, as you had mentioned previously that synthetics weren't included. And I know you and I have talked about the need for some circular guidelines for synthetics, and hopefully we can make that happen in the near future. But how do these other, either biosynthetics or other sort of recycled materials factor in?
So each of those examples are in and of themselves a complex fiber. So I think how I would answer that question is some of the new, and I think Meg has also been working on this quite a bit in Puebla, Maryland, but some of the new innovative materials, like for instance, mushroom leather or pineapple, skins in order to make new fibers, aren't yet at the point where that they're really scalable, and we're not sure they ever will be. They would be for a very particular kind of market. Another example is biosynthetics or recycled polys or anything else. Both of those are also hugely complex and have their own kind of life of issues. So I think what we're particularly looking for in Fashion Positive, but others are doing other things, is one, what is the scalable option so that we can actually start transitioning the whole of the industry on high use materials? So mushroom leather, for instance, will never be a poly, for instance. So we're looking at high volume materials, and what can we learn from those new innovators? Two, we're wrestling now with synthetics and biosynthetics. One of the things that we also have in our guidelines is a whole discussion around compostability and biodegradability. And right now we do not have the systems to biodegrade or even compost at a scale that we use materials in. So also starting to understand and educate, to your point and Marilyn's point, around what does biodegradability mean? How long does it take? What is compostable versus biodegradable? And what materials actually are biodegradable, and under what circumstances, so that we can start to really think through the systems that are needed. Right now, we don't even have the systems to really recycle all the garments we use, much less get into really, really innovative spaces like that. So it's, again, going to take all of the different points of the industry to be working on all of these different solutions to make this a reality. Because even within Fashion Positive, we're only talking about fibers, not even fabric, to not even product. And, EMF is more at the product level. So we all have a role to play to start switching this industry. But I would love to hear from Meg and Marilyn too around that, because I think particularly for the brands working on different material development for what they're trying to develop in product is really interesting. I don't know if you want to say anything, Meg.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can. I think I don't know. Maybe I can go first, and then Megan, you follow me, because it would be a great example. So I think that from the product side, I completely agree with everything that Sasha said. And from the product side, it is true that we were looking more at a product level, and a great example of that is our jeans redesign guideline, where we set out guidelines for the industry into how to create jeans. And Megan, Outerknown is part of that, so maybe she can shed light on that. But what I wanted to say with that example is that depending on the product and the product design and the actual product that you're talking about, the different you will look at the material inputs and prioritize different ones. So for example, in jeans, it's mostly cotton, right? And also there are jeans. So you expect jeans to be durable. That's the kind of like the starting point. And we took jeans just as a very much a starting point of how to get the industry to really design a product fit for a circular economy. And we chose that as a kind of like learning journey. We've learned a lot, and maybe Megan can shed more light on that. But for example, with jeans, we focus a lot on durability and what will that mean for a pair of jeans? Like, what's the benchmark and how can we push it further? And also, how can we make it easy for recyclers to really know that this jean has made and I mean, it's made from safe and renewable materials and it can be easily recyclable. So I know that there are some questions there on labels. So we've got kind of like a label inside the jean so that people can, both a customer, but also the recyclers can recognize it so that they can pick it up. So I think that, I mean, in a nutshell, what I wanted to say is like, it's great. There are many, many solutions and biodegradability and recyclability and different, you know, bio and new materials. But I think at the end, it depends on how do you align that with what you want to design, and how do you align that with how you deliver that product. So you know which channel you use.
Yeah, I think those were fantastic points and well said. That was really great. I want to come back to the jeans redesign because that is really a great example. But I think really quickly thinking through kind of high level, I mean, innovation for me is one of my favorite topics and conversations to be had in the sense that it truly is the unlock for circularity. We have end-of-life solutions, material solutions, recycling capabilities, technology to be able to collect, sort. I mean, all of these solutions that we have to identify as viable, scalable, and actually supporting impact saving. So if we can start to invest in innovation and all rally behind innovation in a meaningful way, I think we really can achieve circularity in the next 10 to 15 years as an industry. But backing up then, once again, it's about having that like shared vision and making sure that we're taking the right approach and that we're pulling in different sectors to be able to help inform this work. So we have this information flow from government to investors. So it's not just brands who are actually working one-on-one or hand in hand with these innovators, but you have funding to support it, you have government backing, and you have supply chain to also support it and to be able to quickly pull it into the current infrastructure. So all of that is critical. And I think what's happening right now, in most cases, we see a lot of brand partnerships with innovators. And although that's really meaningful, it's not going to go far enough and as fast as we need to go. And then talking about, to kind of circle back or loop back to the Jeans Redesign project, I think it's an incredible project. We're so proud to be a part of it in the sense that there are a set of guidelines that we finally could all rally behind as an industry to say, here's how we define circular denim and here's what we need to achieve. And then through that process, we identified a lot of gaps, and that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. It's not something for us to get frustrated with. It's something for us to say, okay, we have to go into problem solving mode and we have to work together. If trims are an issue, how do we work with some of the top trim suppliers to design into solutions as a collective whole, as an industry? Issues with spandex and the ability or inability to be able to recycle it. How do we find new fibers or find new innovators working on stretch solutions? Like, how do we start to solve some of these things together to help improve the guidelines, and then on top of that continue to solve for customer needs and functionality? So we're solving for both style and sustainability. So I feel like innovation is a huge topic that we all need to be having more meaningful conversations around.
Great, and there's another question here, just in speaking about the jeans redesign. Is there sort of guidance there around designing with durability in mind and making more durable jeans? Is that within scope of the jeans redesign?
Yeah, that's absolutely. I mean, it has 4 different, I guess, buckets. So we looked, the first one being durability, then materials health, recyclability, and traceability. So we always, from a circular economy standpoint, we always emphasize and focus on the durability and the increase of use first, because that's where most of the value it is, because it just makes more sense to make the most of products that have been made than to try to like make new ones. So once a product is there, we want to make sure that people can use it for as long as possible. So durability was definitely the first bucket there. And then we look at materials health, because obviously we wanted to be compliant with what other standards and certifications we're pushing. So we're talking about, you know, CDHC on the chemical side, no sandblasting. We talked a lot with textile exchange and cradle to cradle to make sure that from the materials health perspective, these genes will tick, you know, all like the key boxes. And then finally, recyclability, we looked at how can we make it easier and technically, I mean, both technically and economically recyclable for recyclers to actually recycle in practice these genes. And that meant that some brands had to compromise a design of like no rivets, because rivets are quite hard to take out manually, for example. And then finally, traceability, which is what I was talking about, that, okay, now that so much effort has gone through just making these genes, it just made sense to have some sort of a differentiator inside, both for customers, brands, and just the recyclers, so that they can, and the collectors, so they can able to pull these ones out and know, okay, these ones we know that can be recycled. And it's not a label, because it's you know, people can cut it off, but it's also, it's like it's inside the gene.
Great. I think that addresses some of the labeling questions that we've had as well. So, and maybe, you know, there's a question here around, you know, I think for fashion businesses to, how to prioritize, you know, circularity. I mean, it's definitely a tricky, you know, the best approach obviously is to take a holistic approach if possible, but if there was just one place to start, you know, could that be in, you know, in the materials that are being sourced? Is it supply chain changes that have to be made across the supply chain? The disposal of materials, looking at circular business models like reuse and rental models, or is it, you know, is it really about consumers and, you know, the first number one R, which is, you know, reducing consumption. So in each of your own opinions, and maybe we'll kind of wrap it up there, is there one particularly area that you think is really the most important out of all of that?
I can kick us off, and I think there's actually two really easy areas. Well, and I shouldn't say easy, I should say kind of no-brainers, in the sense that if you look at fiber impact, I mean, it has a significant footprint. So starting there to convert to circular materials, even kind of this better best strategy of how do you convert to sustainable and then try to achieve circular is a great starting point, because the fibers are the kind of founding building blocks of our products, or fundamental building blocks of our products. And then I would also say, look to end of life solutions of how you can build into and design into durable products and provide opportunities to keep those in circulation. I think that there's a lot of great models in terms of partnerships out there. So that's kind of an easy lift in terms of two things to strive to achieve.
Thanks. Marilyn?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what Megan said. It's like looking at both, you know, the actual material inputs and what you put inside, and also how do you keep it effectively in circulation, and what are the business models that you can look at so that you can best deliver this product to be used more. And there are, you know, many solutions, and I think some big brands find it daunting sometimes when they have to change completely their operating model. But actually, as Megan was saying, there are so many technological providers, you know, reverse logistics solution providers that now you can partner with, and, you know, have these collaborative partnerships to really put and increase the use of your own products. So I think that just, you know, to be part of the circular economy, you don't have to do it all alone. Looking into partnership is very much encouraged, and I think that's the way forward. And from I guess my point of view is just increasing that use and making sure that things don't end up in landfill.
Great. Anything to add to that, Sasha?
I don't have anything to add. I would probably just put a circle around both of those and say that I saw a question come in around if there's no real municipal recycling or compostability, is there anything such thing as a circular material? I think taking both what Meg and Marilyn have just said, circularity and circular materials is much broader than recycling. And I think what a lot of people think of is recycling, when actually that's the final point, that's the most costly, that we would rather ensure all of the other part of the cycle has been extended and thought through better so that there's less pollution, less waste, less impacts, and then more use, more durability, and more exchange and resale and all of those things. So I think wherever a brand starts, because there's so much of the system that has to be created through policy, through effort, through investment, wherever you start is great. And then you continually move from there, because it's a strategic choice around what kind of company you are. And so if you can invest in materials, that's great. Most will probably start in how do we do logistics and resale.
Yeah, and it's in the wise voice of Stephen Bethel from Bank and Vogue, who was on our first session today. It's truly about just getting started, right? And and that's, you know, getting going on the journey. And earlier, actually, as Edwin said, he made a reference to having, you know, all these juggling balls up in the air and having someone there to catch them. So I thank you, Sasha, for being that person. And you know, I know these large stakeholder groups can be somewhat daunting. To build consensus and to really kind of move forward. And you've done such a fantastic job in such a short amount of time, and all of the stakeholders as well that were a part of building these guidelines. And with that, we are now at the top of the hour. So I'm going to thank you all for joining us. To those of you who are on this webinar, you will be getting an email afterwards with some links, and I've also shared the Fashion Positive Guidelines link to the PDF in the chat. So be sure to also copy that. And then it looks like Marilyn's also shared the Jeans Redesign Guidelines as well. So thank you for that. And thank you, ladies, for this engaging conversation.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Kelly. Bye.
Bye.